Okay, welcome everybody. This is Kurt Muehmel from Dataiku. We're going to get started in just a minute here. So we'll be right here with you in just a minute to kick things off. Okay, welcome everybody to the webinar. More important than ever, data quality in the age of generative AI. My name is Kurt Muehmel, head of AI strategy here at Dataiku. We've got a packed agenda for you. Going to be going through some quick introductions here with Michelle, my co-presenter. Then we're going to talk about the link between generative AI and data quality, specifically those challenges, how to address data quality challenges, other considerations, and the way that Dataiku can fit into that broader picture. And perhaps most importantly, right, we're going to leave time for your questions and answers. Just a quick note on the streaming platform that we're using. You have both the chat, but also the Q&A. So if you look all the way over at the right side of the interface, you're probably on the chat button, which is a kind of a classic chat bubble icon. Just below that, below the participants, you have a question mark and a circle. That's the Q&A button. So go ahead and enter any Q&A that you have there. That allows us a little more functionality to sort through the questions and to make sure that they all get answered. But without further ado, let's do some quick introductions. So hello, my name is Kurt Muehmel. I am everyday AI strategic advisor and head of AI strategy here at Dataiku, where I've been working with customers on questions related to data, analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence now. And I'm joined by Michele Goetz, who's VP of Analytics at Forrester. Michelle, would you like to say a few words of introduction for yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So, as you said, I'm Michele Goetz, analyst over at Forrester. I cover all things AI, data, governance, and really concentrate on how do you ensure that you're successful and also that you're de-risking it so that you can continue to pursue success in your AI strategies.
That's great. Thank you so much,
Good.
Michelle.
Yeah.
And so I think without further ado, I think we can probably just dive into the content. Michelle, would you like to kick us off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I thought I would talk about, kind of walk us through a journey today of three things. Like, is or why data quality can get in the way of AI trust. And obviously, if you don't trust AI, is it going to be adopted? Is it going to be useful for you? We want to understand the generative AI system to understand how data quality impacts that. You really kind of breaking down what that flow is in terms of how data is working and the way that you interact with these systems, all in part on the way that you think about data quality. And then lastly, what are the things that you need to put into place? So there are going to be some basics that you're doing in block and tackle already to ensure that you have trusted information that is feeding your Gen AI system or any AI system. But there's some nuances that we want to be thinking about. So we'll go through each of those. Let's kind of start where we're at. And what we've seen currently is that 85% of AI decision makers are saying that their internal data is high quality and ready to use for AI applications. Well, is that really happening? Well, it's not sure. So there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, we are seeing on the flip side, if you're concerned, what the concerns are. 56% are concerned that they don't necessarily trust the information provided by the generative AI system. So this is on the output, and then 66% are not comfortable giving personal information to generative AI. So part of this goes back to, do you really have trusted information? If you're not understanding the identities of those who are interacting with the system, because you're not getting the right information about them, whether they're employees or customers, that means that your foundational data or information is not necessarily going to feed back what is expected on the other side. And if you're not taking into account other types of data conditions, whether that's in the source or how the data is flowing and meeting the prompts or requests that are coming in, you've got some challenges there. So, what this is sort of introducing is the fact that while you may intuitively think that, well, the information I've been using right now is fairly trustworthy, what generative AI doing is it's taking you beyond the data that you use day to day, looking more holistically at your data. And obviously, the way that you interact with the system and what you're willing to share or not share, or what you may share or not think about sharing, is certainly going to affect the quality, because you need to have the right information. So, some of the disconnect comes from the fact that, the number one data quality issue that arises is that Gen AI incorrectly corrects. So if you think about generating text, a simple way to consider it is when we have our autocorrect on the things that we're typing in. Think about texting or messaging, and it's constantly autocorrecting, and we know how frustrating that is. Well, that's a very early concept of what generative AI is about. But think about how Gen AI might construct information, and you can see maybe it's inputting certain pieces of information that it feels it's relevant, but it's not, or it's making connections between different types of data. And now we start to have hallucinations where it's actually making things up that aren't actually true or accurate. And that is a combination of, can it get to the right information, or is it taking the right context from what you need from the system and interpreting that appropriately? So, what's the second data quality issue? Well, we talk about this in terms of imposter syndrome. If you're familiar with poems and how those are constructed, one is an acrostic poem. And what's interesting about these is that you can create a poem that each line, if you take the letter of each line, it spells out a particular word that you feel is, interesting, or sort of the theme of what's happening and what you're talking about in your poem. Well, you can see here that interpretability is limited sometimes. And certainly we're trying to train and tune and maybe even adjust our prompts in order to get the right information. But sometimes, if you're finding that the Gen AI system isn't quite working appropriately, it still thinks it's doing the right thing, but it's never necessarily going to admit that it's wrong or understand how to correct that. So now the output also is just not trusted. And are you going to adopt a system that you can't really get information that is usable? And then data quality issue number three is, as we talked about, hallucinations can occur. And if you see something like an image, for example, it looks quickly like a proper image until what you realize is that there are actually three arms here. And why is it doing this? Because we don't have deterministic systems anymore. Our Gen AI models are looking at a variety of information and trying to compile those together, and it's making incorrect correlations, but assuming that the confidence in those correlations is high enough that it should actually send that out. And again, this creates an untrustworthy capability. And depending on how you may be able to further train and tune it, it may not be something that you feel is particularly usable. And as you get more complex in what your use cases are and your expectations of what Gen AI is going to be, the more you are going to get into areas where the system is going to further hallucinate. So, with fame, I become more stupid, which of course is a common phenomenon. And so this is sort of Gen AI speaking on behalf of someone like Albert Einstein, which is to that point, as you see things like hallucinations, as you see the imposter syndrome coming up, or just challenges with the base information overall, we assume that because the hype of Gen AI is saying we've got better AI capabilities. That isn't necessarily the case because it still needs to learn about our companies, our activities, and the types of values or outcomes that we're looking for from those systems. So, really, what you're looking at is getting to the point of recognizing how generative AI works, the way that data is going to flow in there, and having stronger observability on the system so that you can assure that the data quality is working. So if we break this down, we think about, well, I input something, which is my prompt, I ask a question, and then I should get something delivered back to me. But really, what's happening in this system is the first thing you need to figure out is the prompt input in such a way that it's high enough quality that the generative AI system is going to understand, or is it something that we're even going to accept? Do we need to obfuscate personal information, for example, or handle it in a different way, or reject those, certain types of questions overall? So that's number one. Number two is, as we interpret that request, is the intent as well as the context understood? So you may have the context of, I want to generate an image of a very interesting man, or, do I want to generate an image of an interesting man with a glass of wine, and taking into account, I want to show that so that I can sell some new wine or invite you to my vineyard. But in that context, again, what did I just do? I introduced intent. So there may be other types of information or ways that's constructed that the system needs to understand what that looks like. And that interpretation turns into metadata that then is applied to, where do I get this data? So we hear things like vector databases, for example, where they're understanding where information is going to come from based off of what is being requested. And if that metadata is created incorrectly, or it's assigned to information incorrectly, well, the discoverability of the right and relevant data isn't necessarily going to come up. We have a data quality problem there. The next data quality problem could come up in, how is the response generated? We talked about hallucinations. This is even before we see the information. It's, how is the system aggregating what is it that we need? Is it creating, how is it creating a right summary, or thinking about how to summarize information? How is it thinking about generating an image? How is it looking at a transcription, and all of those things? So in the back end, really understanding how we compose those responses. And then ultimately, what the prompts are helping to do is put the right construct around how we want to see that information. Do we trust it more if it's in a table? Do we trust the data more if it's in a summarization? Maybe we're trying to put together some type of a table or a graph, and then there's a summary underneath that. So, has it been constructed, and is it lending itself to something that is reliable as we're going to accept that output? to make the decisions that we need. So, really, what we're trying to do here is not only understand what data quality is needed, but having visibility into the way that the system works in order to make that happen. And we know that there's a lot that gets in the way of this because, as much as we're working in generative AI from a RAG perspective or retrieval augmented generation architectures, that's really the higher level data and AI environment where things happen. But when we think about the data, where is it coming from? It's, these RAG architectures are attached to different types of microservices so that it can route and have sidecars for controls in terms of the way that you're going to be able to use that information or access that information. That's calling upon the wider data fabric. Even if you create a generative AI system that is looking at a consolidation of data, oftentimes as you move to a production environment, data is coming from a multitude of locations. It may be living on your laptop, it may be living on your mobile device, it may be back end in a cloud or your on-prem system. And it's not always in the strategy to aggregate all that information. You don't want a whole bunch of copies of data going around, and our operational systems are typically fairly distributed. We need to be thinking about that fabric. And then obviously, we're thinking about how to construct that data in the fabric or access the data through that data fabric in a trustworthy fashion. So there's a lot of transformations that occur within there, a lot of checks, a lot of controls that already exist that have to be orchestrated with the RAG architecture and those services. And then lastly, we're ensuring the base quality of our data from different sources. And some of those have different types of rules and controls and thresholds in terms of what that data quality needs to be. It's not necessarily at the data source aligned to specific contexts or things we want to be, what those use cases are going to be. That's actually how this is coming up front. So what you notice here is, how do you overlay that data flow of request response in terms of what is the user experience for generative AI, and then understand how that starts to operate within the lineage of the data flow to be able to satisfy those requirements. So the other thing that becomes really interesting here is recognizing the fact that a generative AI system isn't just information in a logical format. It's in the context of semantics. A generative AI system is a semantic system, and it lives off of an understanding of our ontologies. Think about if you're a fleet customer, so you're an automotive company and you're selling fleets of cars like ambulances or fire trucks or delivery trucks within there, and it's related to a dealer. We're looking at what is a fleet customer who's buying that fleet or buying those vehicles, and where and who are they buying them from, and what type of relationship happens between those. We can also see how maybe websites and research may happen, any types of promotions that may occur within there. We also understand, as a fleet customer, you're going to look for different types of maintenance, the types of accessories or capabilities and product enhancements that you need. You may have a multitude of vehicles. You want to know where it's manufactured. And you're also thinking about, on the dealer side, how these things kind of come together, and you're able to do those deliveries and manage and help maintain that fleet with your customers. And there's also a financial component to this. So what we're dealing with here is not just, how do I look at, like, these are the critical data elements, but it's really thinking about more holistically, so that you understand not only what types of information need to come into the system to have a viable generative AI capability, but it's also ensuring that what comes out of that system is within the language of your business, and it's readily understood and recognizable in order to be able to use. So I talked about the fact that, that we're going to be able to do something. So what are the actions you want to be able to take? I want to give you 4 things to think about. I want you to think about where to govern the data. What do you want to be governing? How do you want to be governing that data? And who will govern that data? All to get to the point of trusted data quality. So where we govern. So remember when I talked about the fact that we have a highly distributed system. It's particularly complex. Sometimes we might be able to bring all the information together, but really what's happening with generative AI is we're trying to bring the capability to our endpoints. So as we think about where we govern information, it's as important to think about the general system of the data and the sources of information, but you also need to think about the form factors and where that generative AI capability is going to occur. That's also lending itself to context. So, what this is helping you to understand is number one, thinking about what is that data experience? How do you know it's trustworthy? Have you constructed the information in such a way that when the response comes through, it's viable and ready to be used? You want to interpret the appropriate intent. That will also come from not only what was the Gen AI system told what to do or how to do it, what is its job, it's also understanding and interpreting the types of inputs or prompts that are going to occur and where those prompts or how those prompts are being captured. And then obviously, we saw the complexity that happens with the system. You want to ensure that you have the appropriate system interoperability so that data is not only flowing appropriately together, but you're orchestrating and coordinating the different types of controls and data quality standards and thresholds that are required in order to fulfill the request and feed into that generative AI system. So you're really going to be taking a lot of environmental information into context here. If you're all the way out on the engagement edge, this is your mobile devices. It may be the experiences that you have within your cars and your talking to a concierge or some type of capability to help you figure out directions, for example. It may be living within different remote locations like a manufacturing site or a distribution center or a store location, for example, and you're going to have different devices and mechanisms in terms of the way that you're going to interoperate there. And that's going to change also the way that data is going to be shuttled or be available within those locations. And then obviously within our enterprises, which while it may be centrally controlled, the way that Gen AI is being utilized could be embedded within a variety of business applications. And obviously, the edges may be reduced. It's our laptop, for example, or computer. But in terms of the edge being the different types of applications, there's probably going to be some coordination within there. So, where you govern is as important because it helps you understand data flows, but it also helps you understand what additional context from the metadata surrounding your end users is going to come into place. So, what we govern is also going to be different. And what's really important here is at first you think structured and unstructured data, so all types of information. But as you notice, when you start to break down the data flow of the experience and get into those RAG architectures, it's a metadata driven environment and it's also a semantically driven environment. And you need to ensure that the way that the embeddings that are created that help to describe and understand and identify the types of information that you're going to use so that the system runs and can source information appropriately, as well as tying to the way that we think about how we run our business language, our concepts and structures, that ontology that I showed you. All of that has to be mapped appropriately. So it's not just the base data, it's also the supporting metadata and concepts that go with it. And then ultimately, it's not just is the data at the core and the sources good and trusted, but really recognizing how the inputs and the quality of the inputs and the outputs together, because the Gen AI system is doing what? It's generating new data and new relationships and new constructs. And we need to see how that is. It's not deterministic. How we govern is also going to change. Instead of just periodically going in and improving our information, we want continuous curation. And in fact, a lot of times we're using generative AI systems to make that possible because it is a semantic system. So it's helping us to organize and interpret our data, it's applying labels and classifications. It's also helping us to apply the concepts and the models and relationships that we're going to use, as well as potentially even helping us to improve upon that information. So as we're trying to reach out into, the depths of our organization where information lives, continuous curation helps keep on top of this rather than waiting for what is the next use case and how do we redefine that use case. We're in a much more fluid, expansive world, and continuous curation happens. Federated governance becomes increasingly important as well. We talked about the fact that you have different checkpoints that you need to observe and apply controls to ensure that you have the right quality of information. But we also talked about where are those controls going to live. So think about governance as code. Sometimes you want to be, introducing those controls or validations right within the endpoints, like your mobile device, because that's where the requests or the prompts are coming from in that in-app experience. And sometimes you want them in the back end in your data sources. And sometimes you're governing within the Gen AI system or the pipelines themselves. So to really think about placing governance in the appropriate point to ensure quality at scale. And then also, don't forget about where your policies are living. Understand that a vector database is not just how do you get to information, but it provides the point where you can link a particular policy, which gives you the observability around auditing and compliance. If you're in a highly regulated industry or privacy is an important component, a policy is a concept. And the more that you can relate it into that vector environment, the better able you are to see, um, you know, those two objects of what's happening within the system to generate content or what those requests are, and then how that system is being handled it, because you can see what's being requested and how the policy is being applied or the relationship of that policy. So that gives you broader visibility and observability within that environment. And when we talk about who will govern, from a data perspective, we're thinking about the logical domain, which is basically the standards and structures of our information within our systems. We know that it's landing in a physical domain, whether that's on cloud, on prem, or on our devices. And we talked about ontology. So those are the data constructs that we're thinking about. But are the best owners and subject matter experts for each of those domains? Obviously, we have data administrators and data engineers who are really governing more at that systems level, applying those policies, doing governance as code, and federating that governance from a systems perspective. But we're also taking a look at the business roles themselves because semantics is so critical. They need to be much more part of the process. Certainly, data scientists are going to be involved in this as well, but ultimately, they're still relying on their business partners to understand that these systems are going to work and really helping to design what those ontological models are, the types of taxonomies that are being used, hierarchies to further determine what the relationships of information need to be, and assuring what those policies are to stay compliant with all of the AI governance considerations, as well as the data quality information. So we really need to start thinking more holistically about not just um, a center of excellence, but really a community of practice in order to assure we have quality information. So, really, what we're doing is making data quality stand to deliver for trusted AI. And we are seeing that everybody is really putting data governance at the top of their priorities and investing in capabilities to see those controls, observe how the systems are working, and ensuring that the appropriate workflows are being applied and automated to govern in real time and get ahead of any risks that happen. Because we're introducing more of those business subject matter experts, advances in data literacy are occurring. And ultimately, there is a belief and understanding that if you are literate around your data and around your AI, you're ultimately going to be more successful in your careers as well. So think about investing in your people and how to handle that wider community of practice. You want to get that data house in order. We talked a lot about data models, ontologies, policies, observability. And what happens is you want a center of gravity for this. And this is really where the data cataloging environment and the cockpits for governance are coming out, so that you can do the observability. You can see how that ties to your AI governance and data governance types of considerations, as well as interpret any types of anomalies that might be coming up. And your data scientist, through their model ops observability, is recognizing that you have some problems. We talked about objects. You want to really think about data products. Data products, sometimes we think about as like, oh, I created a data set. Here's how it's constructed. This is what I'm offering up to use for my Gen AI system. But what's really important is, if you remember what that holistic system looked like, if you think about how you construct that system, it's really made up of a multitude of artifacts. And so I want you to think about data products as different types of artifacts or assets that you have. Either they're foundational, either they're capabilities like a pipeline that help you to, construct that Gen AI system, or it's the Gen AI experience or application on the back end, which is your consumable type of environment. This becomes important because this is where you can observe and put into context the way that the foundation data exists and what that quality is, how the systems like pipelines and APIs or other types of services are applied in that Gen AI system that change the data and make it more relevant or might be impacting the quality, and ultimately giving you context in terms of how that system is working is where the consumables come in. And again, by using this methodology for data products, it gives you those objects for points of observability to have a deeper understanding of what's happening, which ultimately tells you, can you trust it? And this becomes important as we think about identity management, privacy, security, insight results, and AI results. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is say the quality is not just about, I trust the information, but is the information trustworthy to meet other types of governance considerations? And you can't do that if you have faulty data. And this is where you can prepare your data. So we talked about generative AI could be at the center. And so you want to be able to use it to do that labeling and classification. That's baseline. Do I trust the data? Do I understand the data? Can you validate and check that the data is to the standard that you're expecting? So applying it from that perspective. And also Gen AI can help backfill on different cases. If you need more information in order to train your model, Gen AI is increasingly being used to do synthetic data. So ultimately, if we put all of these things into practice, what are we kind of recommending here? So expand data governance to improve overall AI governance. It's the trustworthiness of the data. Make sure you're able to catalog the data to set standards and controls and workflows so that you're orienting information to what you can trust. You want to use generative AI to improve that data, as we just talked about. You want to ensure that the improvement in the data and the trustworthiness of the data quality also helps to feed into other types of data protection considerations like security and privacy, because that also means that your system is trusted and secure. You want to manage data as a product, because that gives you the objects for observability, what you can trace within that system. And don't forget, we are now a community of practice. Business users are now part of the effort. They own their AI systems. They need to get AI literate as well as being data literate. So thank you for that. And I'm going to pass it over to Kurt.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. That was super valuable to see. Just a brief moment here while I get the screen share up for all of us, and please do keep posting those questions over in the question box. We have a lot of great questions coming in, and we'll be getting to those just in a couple of minutes. Just to share with you, very brief introduction of who is Dataiku for those of you who are not familiar with Dataiku, with our platform. Dataiku really is what we call the universal AI platform. It's a universal platform for analytics, AI, and generative AI. Importantly, since we're starting with data, let's start with the data environments that Dataiku works with. Dataiku works with essentially all the data environments that a typical enterprise is going to have. Everything from the various cloud sources that you see over there on the left, those familiar logos, all the way down to what's increasingly becoming called legacy data sources, SQL, NoSQL, etc. Even though, of course, those are often very essential sources of data, very robust systems, which continue to provide a lot of value in the enterprise. Well, what do we do when you have access to that data in Dataiku? Well, this green rectangle here, that's really the core of Dataiku. And so what I want to just mention is it covers both the design and experimentation and the production and orchestration of your data science work, of your analytics work, of your machine learning, and now of your generative AI. As you see over on the left-hand side of that rectangle, it covers everything from a full code to low code to no code spectrum, meaning that the different individuals within the organization, different team members with different backgrounds, different skill sets to bring to bear, be they a data scientist, a data machine learning engineer, a data analyst, a business expert sitting out in the business, that they can all work to build those different data products. At the same time, they're collaborating with their operations teams to deploy, monitor, and manage those different products as they are put out into production. Dataiku runs on top of the infrastructure that our customers have in place already, pushing down compute into Snowflake, into Databricks, into the variety of different systems that people have. Common structure now is increasingly Spark and Kubernetes working together, but of course the GPUs from NVIDIA and others are also a core part of that. And now, of course, as generative AI begins to take on more of a interest in the enterprise, the availability of those generative AI foundational models becomes an increasingly important part of that offering, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about those connections as well. Well, what do you do with this, right? Well, either you're developing applications and visualizations directly in Dataiku, up there kind of on the top left, or those results are being pushed into external BI platforms like Tableau or Power BI. Increasingly, they're often powering different business applications by exposing an API, all of which can be managed within Dataiku. And perhaps importantly, all of this is done in a secured, governed, and scalable framework. One of Dataiku's most unique differentiators is the governance framework that it provides for everything from the data access through the analytics building, all the way out through the machine learning and the AI, so that we can ensure that that you're compliant with all existing but also future regulations, which, as we know, are coming not only for data privacy, as was the case with, for example, GDPR in the previous years, but also now for artificial intelligence, with the, for example, EU AI Act coming out in a matter of weeks to months once that's all finalized. So this is, of course, a big platform. Dataiku is a very capable platform, one which is both very broad and very deep. And you might wonder, right, why would we think about a platform from that perspective? Why not do something more limited in scope? Because certainly it was not easy to build all of this. Well, I think it'll make it clear when we think about this actually in the context of data quality. Because the three ways that Dataiku thinks about data quality are to discover data, to make it easier to discover data so that the people who need to do work with the data can get that access more quickly. Two is to make the data more reliable together so that there's a collaborative notion of building and improving data quality as you go. And then three is to operationalize that data quality. And so if we dig into those a little bit more, starting with the discovery of data, it's necessary to allow individuals not just to know which data is available, but to allow them to explore it, to run some either quick ad hoc analysis or deeper analysis on that data. And that includes, of course, features which can be used within machine learning models or which may be fed into a generative AI system. So one, it's important to have a broad view of discovery. It's not just a matter of having a data catalog that tells you, which data sets are available in which systems, what the metadata is, perhaps where they've used. But very quickly, discovering data requires actually working with the data to be actually sure that this is the data that will serve your purposes, meet the quality requirements that you have, or of course may require some preparation, some improvement to reach those standards in order to be used effectively. Number two, right, is the need to make data reliable. And one of the things that we say often is that data quality work is happening throughout your organization all day, every day. Most often, though, a lot of that work is lost. Why is that? Well, often what happens, right, is that somebody finds a data set that they want to use. They export that data set from its source system, from the production system or the reliable system. They rework that data, often in a spreadsheet, and then with that, they go about their work. They serve their own purposes with that now improved data, but that improved data never gets written back into the source system, meaning that the next time that somebody else needs to do something similar or exactly the same, they're going to redo that work. And so the notion of Dataiku is that, well, let's work together in those source systems in a way which is, of course, governed with all the appropriate access controls to make sure that when we're preparing data once, we're doing it once for good. And so that we can have data preparation happening universally across the entire platform, and such that all of the work of the different collaborators who are doing different things, that data quality improvement is actually captured and capitalized on so that you can improve your data quality as you go. This, of course, also covers feature engineering, with all the feature stores that are required for a machine learning platform to ensure that the data which is going to be used to train your future models is the best quality available, ensuring that you're going to get better quality predictions or classifications as a result of your data. And then the third point, right, is the necessity to operationalize your data quality. That includes data observability and the ability to ensure that your golden data sets are highlighted and, well, kind of shown off in a showroom to ensure that they're being picked up and used rather than an individual collaborator going off and building a new one instead. Of course, you also need to be able to share your data internally to ensure that, once again, people are not recreating something which already exists. And so as a team, right, we're both discovering data, making data more reliable, and then operationalizing it. And as you can see, all three of these different steps and overall data quality is required both for analytics, AI ML, and generative AI. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as well, is that data quality itself is not a separate process from any one of these three different categories of different data products. It's an integral process. It's the foundation. It's the first step to be able to do good analytics. It's the first step to be able to do good machine learning. It's the first step to be able to do good generative AI is strong data quality. And so this is going back to the question that I posed, why is Dataiku built in such a way so as to allow such a breadth and depth of functionality and coverage? Well, it's to ensure that you're getting the most efficient results by doing all the different tasks that you need to do in a single coherent platform to ensure that you're not duplicating efforts. Now, this has now been expanded to cover generative AI with what Dataiku calls the LLM mesh, right? The LLM mesh is the layer which connects to all of the different LLM services, all of the different generative AI services. And then in addition to that connectivity, offers a lot of value-added functionality, such as cost reporting, PII detection, auditability, of course, security and permissions to ensure that those connections are only used by the people who are allowed to use them, built-in retrieval augmentation, and many more, right? So I won't go through the full suite of functionality here, but it's meant to apply or add all the additional services and functionality that these AI services would require to be used effectively at scale within the enterprise. And so once we have connectivity to all of these different AI services, if we look up at the top of the screen, that's all the different things that we can then do within Dataiku with those different AI services that we now have access to. That includes let's call them modern NLP recipes, so NLP powered by LLMs. This is a great example of what Michele was mentioning about using generative AI to do data preparation. Here's where you can do classification, summarization, where you can clean up your data using an LLM. It's also where you can develop and maintain your prompts. So now your prompts are becoming a new asset, a new type of data within your organization. Dataiku's Prompt Studios covers that. Dataiku allows you now to do RAG very easily in a fully no-code manner, which also allows you to overcome some of the challenges of the hallucinations from LLMs by ensuring that you're providing the answer from your own documentation to the LLM itself. And then Dataiku Answers is a chat interface that sits on top of that. Dataiku's generative AI solutions are various pre-built solutions to accelerate your use of this. And then, of course, throughout Dataiku, there's various AI assistants helping you do your data preparation, do your data quality, and so on. So we have generative AI for the purposes of data quality, and then also data quality efforts supporting generative AI work as well, all within Dataiku. Just to give you two quick examples, one is Bankers Bank, which is a bank out of Wisconsin, who's been using data quality as really the core focus to increase the efficiency of their teams. And they've done this by bringing together different data sources, so team members don't have to go and hunt around for new data. They're able to ensure that the reports that they're developing are done automatically, which also ensures that there's not human error entering into it. Given that everything is processized, operationalized, they've built a process once, validated that process, and then when they run it, they are sure that the quality of the data is going to be at the level that they are satisfied with, allowing them to take those various reports to the leadership, decision makers, even reporting authorities, regulatory authorities, to ensure that they're reporting in a way which is efficient and accurate. Some of the benefits, right, that you can see down there is now work that used to take 2 days is now only a matter of 30 minutes, resulting in an 87% saving in time spent. If we look now at LG Chem, a South Korean company, which has built out now a RAG system, so that's retrieval augmented generation, to ensure that their workers can quickly find answers to the various tasks that they have. So obviously, as a large industrial organization, they have a lot of internal documentation about their operations, about the processes, which is extremely important for their employees to follow. To make that easier, they've built this RAG application to ensure that the team members can get access to that quality data as quickly as they possibly can. This was done in a way that allowed them to respect their IT and safety regulations by using trusted partners. In this case, they were using Azure OpenAI as the AI provider, as well as the LangChain framework. That said, this was all built within Dataiku because Dataiku allowed them to access those different AI services as well as their corporate data, and to build those pipelines that said, go ahead and look for the data in these sources when providing the answer back to the end users. And so this for LG Chemical was the first in what they anticipate will be a stepping stone for many future use cases that's going to use generative AI on top of their corporate data, their private data, so that they can continue to improve the efficiency and the safety of their team members working in what are could be dangerous environments, but are not, since they're able to follow all those regulations, all of their policies, and ensure that everyone has access to the information that they need. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to the webinar, and we'd like to open it up for Q&A. So I'm going to come back over here and turn off the screen share as we briefly go into a little bit of a recursive loop there. This way you get to see Michele and myself as well. And for the Q&A, I'd like to invite my colleagues Stephanie and Lauren back in to perhaps help us sort through some of the great questions which we've received so far. So I don't know if Stephanie or Lauren, if you have any questions teed up that you'd like us to take.
Yes, so thank you both for the really engaging and incredible webinar. We do have quite a few questions in the chat, so let me just get that up so we can start answering those questions. So starting with the first one from Jim, have you experienced with data governance in the construction of a digital twin? Are there any specific aspects of data governance to adapt for this purpose?
Michelle, would you like to take that one? Or I don't have a lot of deep expertise with digital
On
twins
digital twins.
specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's actually a really great question because there's sort of two sides of the digital twin. There's, how are you just processing it and looking at what's happening within the system and guiding towards, where it goes next. So it's sort of an operational use case for it. The other side of it is kind of the way that you would think about it from a wargaming perspective. Data quality. So let's start with the latter first, because oftentimes building that digital twin from sort of a simulation perspective is what sets the operational foundation later. There's a couple of things. So the governance, number one, is how do you go to and find the appropriate information that is going to set the foundation of the types of things that you want to pull levers on so that you can do the appropriate hypothesis testing there. Governance jumps in a funky way because it's not just how do the data engineers open up access to that information and put the appropriate checks and balances on it like you would think on any sort of data sourcing and access. But you're also thinking about how does the business user who's going to test hypotheses think about the type of information. So this is where the ontology starts to come in. So there's a lot more hands-on with the business users in that context. The other area that the data governance comes in is the use of synthetic data. Oftentimes simulations have to be fed synthetic data. So you're thinking about the governance of where did my data come from? Is there private information that I need to be mindful of? In the case of using some of the Gen AI capabilities, you don't want to be accessing information that is copyrighted or you don't have access to or you shouldn't be using. So you need to be thinking a little bit more of the sort of the supply chain element and putting the appropriate controls and obfuscation within there as well. Once you can start setting that foundation for the training on the simulation, really what you're doing from a data governance perspective is getting that input from the data scientists and the end users of how the data is behaving to being able to give you a trustworthy foundation of that digital twin before you're going to use it for your hypothesis testing and have that be reliable. And even in that hypothesis testing, you're going to find things that are kind of weird. And so you're going to want to go back to them and figure out, why is that happening? And then obviously, once you move that into an operational functioning system that is automating or augmenting and scaling out some of those processes and activities or decision making, for example, having stronger observability over the way that data, how that data is functioning within that system is going to be important and kind of touches back on those factors that I mentioned within the presentation earlier. Kurt, do you want to add to that?
I think that's fantastic. I don't think I would have anything at all to add to that, Michelle.
Sure.
Thank you
Stephanie?
so much, Michelle. So we have another great question. So what about governance and how this could be done? How one could make sure that Gen AI will actually not always be generating fake information?
Sure. Yeah. So I can take perhaps a first stab at that. So I think we need to think about all the different applications of generative AI. I think initially, ChatGPT, the product from OpenAI, this public chatbot, gave the impression of kind of an all-knowing, oracular chatbot that will just give you the right answer, we thought at the beginning, to any question. Which of course then there was a bit of a backlash to that, and we learned, of course, that generative AI is not necessarily going to create accurate answers. It's going to create answers or responses which sound correct, but which are not necessarily correct. And so I think in the context of an enterprise, we need to get out of the mindset of these as answer machines and get into the mindset of them as writing machines in a way, and to a degree, reasoning machines, which can start to break down problems and take on certain tasks which would have otherwise been the responsibility of a human. And so I think that you have to first think about the application, the use case that you have in mind for using that generative AI. Is this going to be something, for example, public facing, where it's really critical that we give always the right answer with always the right tone? In that case, there's probably a lot of engineering in the prompt itself, as well as in the way in which the LLM, the AI model itself, is actually accessing your data through a RAG technique, for example. Or, of course, are we using this in a backend process to go through and do some automated data quality? In which case, a lot of the approaches that you would have had prior to AI, right, to measure data quality over the entirety of a data set, would then also apply and allow you to check the quality of that data after the AI has gone through in its attempt to improve the classification, maybe fill in some of the null values within that data set as well. So I think it's really important to consider data quality in generative AI on almost a per use case basis, or at least a kind of per family of use case basis, because there's going to be some applications where you absolutely critically need to have the right answer every single time. Others where a 90% improvement is still good enough, and you can tolerate 10% of imperfection. And then once we have that in mind, then of course we can apply specific techniques like RAG to ensure that we're providing an accurate answer rather than generating an answer out of kind of the memory of the AI of what it learned. Michele, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, another technique is how having the ability to apply certain types of constraints. So we're seeing DAG capabilities, a knowledge graph, for example, or graph database being used that helps you reduce the number of levels that the foundation models are actually going to reach into to figure out what those correlations are going to be. Usually the deeper they're going for correlations is where more of the hallucinations are going to come up from. So you've got some ways to kind of control that a little bit. The flip side of that is that if you start to constrain how the model is running and computing, you're also constraining your costs. It's a double-edged sword. You may be creating an environment that is overly deterministic, for example. The other thing, too, is we're seeing question-answer pairs being forced into memory. And again, this is where those graph environments are coming up. As you see similar questions being asked with similar answers, or should have the same answer, you can start running those against each other, updating obviously over time as things change and optimizing that. But that gives you also a little bit more control to set the standards and the responses that you want in the scenarios that make most sense. So there are some architectural or engineering types of ways to modify that a little bit, but that's other things that we're seeing too.
Fantastic.
All right, so it looks like we're coming right up at the hour, but I want to thank you both so much for the webinar. Of course, the recording will be available on demand right after, so you'll be able to rewatch. So do make sure you keep your virtual unique link, and thank you both again.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Lauren, for all of your help organizing behind the scenes. Thank you, Michele, for the great content. It was really interesting. And thanks to all of the attendees. We had great attendance on this. It was great to see. Sorry that we didn't get to all the questions, but we'll try to do some follow-up as well. And we look forward to seeing all of you hopefully soon on the next one of these.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.